So welcome everyone to this longevity panel discussion. As I mentioned earlier, we are very honored to have assembled some of the biggest scientists in the field who are currently working on reversing aging. This discussion is intended to illuminate how they are approaching longevity and to know if we are any closer to achieving. We are going to do some quick intros on the moderators, house rules, and then introduce our panelists. Myself, my name is Laura Minquini, and I'm the founder of Minquini. I'm building a direct-to-consumer longevity platform dedicated to the education and vetted curation and management tools for people to get on board in a longevity lifestyle. I spent most of my career in trend forecasting and actually something outside of science, which is fashion and design. But in looking into the aging space, I realized that longevity is the only way to change that paradigm, and I hope that more people get interested in it. So that's our mission. Anyone interested in a future of prevention and regeneration, please subscribe or contact me. And I'm very happy here to be with two experts in the field who I consider friends now, Avi Roy and Nathan Cheng, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Thank you, Laura, and hello, everyone. My name is Avi. I'm a biomedical scientist and entrepreneur in Oxford. I advise and fund startups in health and longevity space based in Europe, North America, and India. And I also work with governments to develop and refine policies so that we can get an infrastructure for longevity built. And besides myself and the ever ebullient Laura, we're also joined by the erudite Nathan, who will be our co-moderator. Nathan, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Avi. Hello, everyone. My name is Nathan Cheng. I'm the founder of the Longevity Market Cap newsletter. It's a once-a-week roundup of developments in the longevity biotech industry. I'm also the founder of Longevity List, which is a website where you can find jobs, companies, and investors in the longevity biotech industry. So if you're looking to join like a longevity biotech startup, definitely check that out. And last but not least, I'm currently working with a bunch of great people on an awesome secret project to accelerate progress in longevity. It's still in stealth, but if you are interested in either like building, funding, or joining a longevity biotech startup, then definitely send me a DM on Twitter. Okay, so we have all our guests here. Welcome, Greg and David. I guess I'll hand it over to Laura in just a second to do intros, but just a quick FYI, again, this is being recorded, so if anybody comes up to the stage for question and answer period, that means you consent to us using your voice and profile photo in the recording. Thanks. Laura, I'll hand it over to you for intros.
Thanks, Nathan. So my job now is going to be to read everybody's amazing. And first one is Alexandra Stolzing, who is the head of research at SENS Research Foundation and professor at Loughborough University. Her research focuses around the amelioration of the hallmarks of aging. Next is David Gobble, who is the co-founder and CEO of Methuselah Foundation. His focus is establishing and supporting research and breakthrough technologies in regenerative medicine. Next up is Jean Yvert. He's an associate professor at the Department of Genetics at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine and author of Replacing Aging. He is devising methods of cell replacement for the adult neocortex where its cells are lost due to damage or age-related degeneration. Zhao, please tell me how to say your last name. I'm always butchering it, so I want to make sure that I say it correctly.
Oh, please try it.
João Pedro de Magalhães. No, Magalhães. I'm so sorry. I wish my Portuguese was better. Please correct me.
You can just call me Pedro. That's fine. That's what everybody does.
Okay, Pedro. Thank you. Is a microbiologist and professor at the University of Liverpool. The goal of his work is to understand the genetic, cellular, and molecular mechanisms of aging across all organisms. Liz Parrish is the founder and CEO of BioViva Sciences. Her focus is the advancement of gene therapy for the purpose of extending healthy lifespan in humans. Next is Aubrey de Grey, the Chief Scientist Officer and co-founder of the SENS Research Foundation. He is the biomedical gerontologist, author of Ending Aging, and one of the longest proponents to study the field of longevity. Greg Fay is the Vice President and Chief Scientist Officer of 21st Century Medicine, and is a cryobiologist, biogerontologist, and businessman based in California. His research focuses on organ cryopreservation by vitrification. And last but not least, Dr. David Sinclair is a professor of genetics and co-director of the Paul F. Glenn Center for the Biology of Aging at Harvard Medical School. He's the author of Lifespan, and his research focuses on understanding and slowing the pace of aging through a variety of approaches. And this is our amazing panel of scientists working on reversing aging. I'm going to hand this over to Avi now.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks for doing the hard work of introducing everybody, although everybody here probably is very well known by all the people in the audience and worldwide. So I'm going to begin with a rapid fire question. So please keep your answers as succinct as possible. I'm sure many people have asked you this question before, but how do you, with your research and your work and the companies that you advise, how do you plan to reverse aging? And so that everybody doesn't jump in at once, maybe we can go ladies first, and with first names. Alexandra, do you want to go first? How do you plan to reverse it?
Thank you for the question. Yes, how do I want to do it? As I work for the Sense Foundation, our paradigm has been to reverse damage that has accumulated with aging. And we have a couple of these like damages in our body, and we have projects that try to reverse them. And apart from the science bit, being out and about and informing the public and talking about it, I think is the other thing that would really help us reversing aging. And I'll leave it at this point.
Okay, I think I'm probably next. I'm the only other lady here outside of Laura. BioViva is committed to reversing aging through gene therapy. A lot of people probably know that. If you don't, check it out. It's pretty cool. And we have developed a new vector delivery system that can deliver multiple genes, decent sized genes. And so we hope to deliver the first mini artificial chromosome to work as a protector, maybe something like a vaccine against aging. But we're really looking to upregulate regeneration more than the degeneration at the cellular level. So we go after the hallmarks of aging. And by doing that, we hope to accomplish our task of not only slowing or stopping aging, but reversing it.
Fantastic. Aubrey?
Yeah, so Alex more or less said it. I'm delighted to have Alex on our team at Sense Research Foundation. We are interested in repairing the various types of damage of aging, which have been, of course, described and classified in various ways by various authors over the past 20 years. But that doesn't really change the priorities of what we need to develop. We are at the foundation working on the most challenging aspects of that, because those are the aspects that other people, whether for financial reasons or other reasons, have been neglecting. And our business model is essentially to work on damage repair of a particular type for as long as it takes to get to the point where it becomes investable, at which point we spin projects out as startup companies. And so, of course, we work very closely with the private sector, and the eventual goal is to be able to apply many of these therapies to the same people at the same time, so as to keep all aspects of their accumulation of damage within the threshold level that the body is able to tolerate, and thus to prevent and preempt all of the health problems of late life.
Thank you. Either of the Davids?
I will yield to David Sinclair first.
Thanks, David. So we're pretty excited in my lab about reversing aging through epigenetic means. So this is what we call partial reprogramming. We published a paper in December about the use of 3 of the Yamanaka factors to restore eyesight in old mice and mice that had optic nerve damage. And we're continuing to use that technology to tick off the various tissues and organs in animals to see which ones can be rejuvenated from old age deterioration. And so we're looking at that. We're doing a number of screens to figure out how this actually works, how it's possible. There's a backup copy of a youthful epigenome in mammals. And we're working towards clinical trials, which will head into primates by the end of this year, with the goal of treating blindness initially, but ultimately having hopefully some small molecules and other easier treatments than gene therapy to reverse either individual tissue, aging, or whole body.
Thank you. David G.
So Methuselah Foundation is in the business of identifying holes and filling them. The first hole we filled in partnership with Aubrey, when Aubrey was my co-founder at Methuselah Foundation. The first hole was no scientist could actually pursue this project we're on without losing their career. And we had a Methuselah Mouse Prize and Aubrey's presentations in the public, the book, that turned that situation around, and now it's an inevitability. The next hole was that it needed to be investable. And so we started Methuselah Fund, and that started what we hope and think has become something of a reference portfolio. In the portfolio are epigenetic reprogramming, as David Sinclair mentioned, Turn Bio out of Stanford, senescent cell ablation. We're partnered with the SENS Foundation in Oshin Bio and with, or Oncogenics, excuse me. So those are just a couple of examples. The next hole was associated with our strategy of new parts for people. You can get parts for an old Corvair, 1961 Corvair, but if you need new parts for people, you can't do it. You got to get plastic and titanium and ceramic. I think that's ridiculous. So we partnered with NASA to create a solution to the rate limit for scaling up 3D printed tissues to macro-sized tissues. And that was just one last week. It exists. The hole has been filled. Of course, there's lots of little holes around it that need filling, but that is a breakthrough of titanic proportions. And I don't mean the sinking Titanic either. So that's what we do. We find holes and we fill them. There's still plenty of holes to fill.
Thank you, David. Greg? I think Greg has just dropped off. Would you like to?
First, thanks for having me. Yeah, so I come from the perspective, echoing a bit what Alexandra said about damage, but I come from the perspective that the complexity of macromolecular damage that occurs with age, and is really well documented, really mandates tissue replacement as an essential component to beating aging. And as you've just heard from David G., that's underway for lots of parts of the body. A lot of people are interested in that. But what we're focused on is the neocortex, the part of the brain that we use for our highest cognitive functions. And we're taking sort of a ship of Theseus approach, where we plan on progressively being able to replace the whole neocortex over time, piece by piece of tissue by piece of tissue. And the proof of concept that this should work is already well established due to the nature of how the neocortex works. It's a very plastic substrate. The execution, however, is far from being achieved. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done there, technical hurdles, and those are the things that we're working on.
Thank you, Jean. Our final participant for the answer?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Pleasure to be here. So I would say, on one hand, reversing aging, I would like to understand the mechanisms of aging. Why do we age? What are the molecular, cellular, genetic mechanisms of aging? What's the drivers of aging? So that's one of the things I've been working on. I don't think we understand the process of aging. I've just put out this preprint criticizing the hallmarks of aging as a paradigm. So not that I think hallmarks of aging is a wonderful review, but I don't think it explains aging. I don't think it's the dogma of the field of aging that sometimes people perceive it as. I'm not even sure damage causes aging. So I don't think we understand well the process of aging. And in order to intervene and to reverse it, I think we need a better mechanistic understanding of aging. So that's one of the things I've always been interested in and I'm still working on in my lab. In addition to that, I also work with several companies, technology development in particular. In particular, I'm also the CSO of Centaura, which is a Swiss-based company. We're developing new technologies, in particular for artificial chromosomes and gene therapies. The idea is that even if we can figure out why we age, then we need to do it, to actually develop the therapies. And that's not straightforward. So we're also working on developing the technologies that hopefully one day would allow us to reverse aging. And lastly, I've always done outreach and I've always been interested in spreading the word of the importance of research on aging. I don't think that's as necessary than when I was started more than 20 years ago, because now there's lots of websites and lots of advocates, but that's something I still do.
Thank you, Joao. Nathan, next question.
Okay, thanks, Avi, and thanks to all the panelists for your responses. So For our next question, I'll just start off. So Siddhartha Mukherjee writes in his book, The Emperor of All Maladies, that science begins with counting. So if we want to reverse aging or slow it, what are the most promising approaches to measuring biological aging and the effectiveness of the therapeutic interventions that we're developing? So this question is open to anybody on the panel. Maybe we'll start with David Sinclair.
Great. I'm talking from my car. Hopefully you can hear me okay. So the field has had a real breakthrough in the last decade with the discovery of the epigenetic clock. It was really the first truly accurate measure of biological age. There are more now. There's the glycan age, there's an immuno age, there's the proteome that you can look at. But I'm still a big fan of the accuracy and the underlying biology of the DNA methylation, also known as the Horvath clock. That is a pretty good predictor of future health, both in animals and in people, and now cross species. And the fact that you can use the same clock to look at aging in bats and sheep and dogs and humans is quite a remarkable thing that Steve Horvath has shown us. So that's the best one, and do a bit of a reveal here. My lab does work on lowering the cost of that test. We've made some breakthroughs, and we are looking to commercialize that in the near future to democratize that test so that people will be able to monitor their biological age, which I think is actually just as important, if not more important, than their actual age.
May I take a stab?
Yes, please.
So I come from an additional viewpoint, not clocks, but the fact that we have, as mammals, an excruciatingly sophisticated methodology of finding those who are young and fertile. We look at body plan and the face. And so for me and our organization, we look for empirical and functional results, i.e., we know it when we see it. We are very much against the we're going to take 130 pills and hope for the best crowd. Our view is if you're already old, let's say that 50 means you're on a decline, if you don't feel better because of an intervention, either prospectively or actually, then is it really doing anything? Now, scientifically, the numbers may be better, but I argue that perhaps we don't know what the numbers mean yet. For instance, in 1974, the United States went on a tirade to make sure that our cholesterol was down low and that the numbers were supremely important. And now we're finding out, oh, wait a minute, it was inflammation. So I follow what the Supreme Court Justice said when he said, I don't know how to define pornography, but I know it when I see it. So we focus on things like skin improvement, deep skin improvement, functional improvement, muscular improvement. The reason that we invested in Turn Bio out of Stanford was because their results were functionally apparent. It was inarguable. They worked better, stronger, and the bones healed faster. So we know it when we see it as our clock.
I agree with the epigenetic clock. BioViva, we have a clock now that offers people 5 different results based on different peer-reviewed, agreed-upon clocks. And I think that the epigenetic clocks are great. But I do the immune clocks. I like all the things that both of the Davids talked about. There is also cognitive function, and those tests are getting better. And I think they're going to be really important. You're going to see that come out in one of the papers that we're going to be releasing soon. And then as to David G, what's happening inside the body is as important as what's happening outside. When you're looking at treating aging, you may have to start with an eye in the case of David S.'s case, or you may have to start with a kidney. Some of us would like to start with the whole body. And the truth is that in order to cure aging, you're going to have to be able to target every tissue. Now, in some cases, we might have better results with certain areas of the body or not. And the great thing about treating traditional disease is it gives us the ability to have end markers that we know what we have to meet, whilst the better biomarkers of aging are developed. But speaking to that inside and outside of the body, the MRI images of an old and a young person are very evident. And actually, Avi, this speaks to one of the brilliant ideas that you had some, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago, which was like creating an encyclopedia of the slices, the cross-sectional analysis of MRI images throughout a human body, because the brain, the liver, the organs, they all change. And so it's not just on the outside, it's all the way through. So some sort of cross section. And with some of the gene therapies, we do that. We actually take imaging because we want to see all the way through if there are any changes. So I think that's going to be an important marker coming up.
Can I build on that maybe? The imaging idea I think is very good, especially for certain parts of the body like the brain. We do 2-photon imaging to look inside the brain, the live brain, and we see in model animals, and no reason to think it would be different in humans, that the light penetration and diffraction starts deteriorating as soon as you reach adulthood, and then the longer you go, the worse it gets. It's a very measured phenomenon, and it's also interesting that it can be disconnected completely from cognition. So I'm not so sure cognition is a good measure. So there's a lot of things that will reverse cognition to what is considered a younger performance stage. Caffeine, for instance, for a lot of people improves their cognition. But does that really reverse aging? And if we look at this less performance-based but more anatomical-based imaging method, we see that aging is not reversed, even though cognition or the performance is. So I think we have to be careful about what we're measuring, because yes, maybe we're improving performance, and that's great, and we should do that. But we're not necessarily reversing the aging process, however you define it. I would define it as the accumulation of damage, and that's pretty apparent in the brain because of this light diffraction that occurs progressively over time. We might be able to improve our quality of life to a certain extent, to a certain age, but if this accumulation of damage goes unimpeded, we hit that wall at around 100, 120. And that's actually been calculated for certain molecules that don't turn over much, like elastin, or don't turn over at all. The vasculature can't survive past 100, 120 years without being replaced. But that's generalizable for other aspects of tissue structure and tissue components. So you have to be a little weary, I think, of performance as a measure of age reversal. And try to stick to more biological, molecular, or anatomical measures.
I'd like to jump in and make a quick comment. One of the problems of our field is funding. If you want to get vast funding, help people look and perform younger, and the funding will come in like a flood. I don't speak against what you said technically, though, Jim.
Yeah, I think one of the important things to highlight here is that even though we have become very much better in the past decade at developing clocks for aging of one sort or another, in other words, predictors of how soon you're going to start suffering from the health problems of late life, that are based on large quantities of data that was previously technically inaccessible. Even though we've got enormous progress there, what we still are really at square one on is identifying clocks that can be validated in the context of interventions. In other words, clocks that can reliably be assumed to give us good information, advanced information, regarding whether an intervention is working. Of course, it's very true that we want to be predicting that before there is any substantial functional decline, ideally before there's any substantial cosmetic decline, to go back to what Dave just said. But we might be getting there. But in the context of actually whether an intervention will break the clock, will be uncoupled from the clock, in other words, whether the clock will actually reliably tell us whether the intervention is working, I think we're still very much at the very early stage.
Okay, thanks for that. Oh, okay, Greg, welcome to the stage. We missed you a little earlier. Maybe you can answer this question, and at the end, you can maybe just tell us a little bit about your sort of perspective on how you are reversing aging.
Sure, and I apologize. I had a little technical difficulty ringing in before. Yeah, so just to pick up on some of the things that have been said, at Intervene Immune, we are actually using interventions that can be applied right now to do things like epigenetic programming, but by changing the signals that cells see in the body so that their instruction set for how they should behave changes in a more youthful direction. And we've been trying to reverse the aging of the immune system by regenerating the thymus. But in the process of doing that, we've also found that epigenetic aging has been going in reverse in our treated volunteers based on all four of the standard clocks, plus a plasma-based clock that we applied retrospectively to our data set recently after our first clinical trial. So to marry that information with what's been discussed, I think we have an example of situation in which you see both performance enhancements and epigenetic clock reversals just by changing the signaling paradigm that the body is being subjected to. And we have people saying that they feel great subjectively, but then objectively, we see things like kidney improvement, reduction of prostate cancer risk, improved lung function, and all kinds of other things that can be objectively measured. So we have both the performance / subjective aspect looking good and the objective epigenetic clock based measurements looking good as well. And our goal is to do something about aging in the near term and not to have to wait for the development of much more sophisticated therapies in the future, because we're all aging now and we need some answers sooner rather than later.
Great, thank you, Greg. Is there anybody else that wants to chime in? Joe Pedro, Alexandra?
Maybe just some very short comments. We need more clocks, even that we have a couple of very good clocks already in the market. I think we need more of them, and we need them cheap, as mentioned before, and we need them so that everyone at home can have them as well. That would be really like helping a lot with like clinical translation if people don't have to come in for a very intensive or expensive measurement. So it would be really great. And having causative markers, so something that is actually involved, as Joe Pedro said, like in how we are aging, like knowing that your marker is actually involved in that process would be really nice. So yeah, we need more of them.
So yeah, I don't have much to add. I agree with David Sinclair that the epigenetic clocks is the most reliable now, and it's also fascinating how, particularly now, these preprints from Steve Horvath of how it works across mammals. I'm still trying to get my head around it. I think it's incredible. But I would agree with Aubrey. In fact, Aubrey once said that the major outcome of aging is, of course, death. So that's what we need to predict. And although there are epigenetic clocks, well, I think there's GrimAge, for instance, I'm not sure we know enough to do a clinical trial based on it. So we still have some way to go before we can use this for trials.
I guess I just need to say that we did observe a reversal of GrimAge in the TRIM trial that we did, and we are now launching something called TRIM-X. And we have preliminary evidence, at least based on the plasma clock, that we're seeing similar effects. But we do plan to emphasize the GrimAge clock as something that can be modified by an available intervention going forward. So I do think that there's actually a lot of potential for using GrimAge clock for monitoring the course of clinical trials in the near term.
Okay, great. Thank you for all your answers. I'm going to hand it over now to Laura for the next question.
Thanks, Nathan. So I love that David Sinclair mentioned about the democratization of some of these tools that people will be able to use to look at something like the biological age, which, as you mentioned, is more important than your chronological age, because that's your health, your actual health. I have a question for the panel, because I know that longevity science, though it's really advancing in the last 20 years, people have been talking about this for a long time. In 1969, gerontologist Alex Comfort suggested that life expectancy, not simply maximum lifespan, could be extended to 120 years within the next 20 years. That didn't happen because he obviously is not with us anymore. What will be different this time as we try to get people interested in longevity or promise them that this is imminent in some way or form? And this is a lightning round question, so if our panelists could give a succinct answer to how we can get people to believe that this is a possibility.
I'll jump in first and say that the largest, most wealthy generation in history does not want to go quietly into that good night. And they are more and more going to be putting their money into this. So it's going to be raining in floods. Number two, look at the size of the audience of this clubhouse and the quality of the presenters. There's no snake oil here.
I'd like to, thank you, David. That's awesome. I'd like to add to that that unlike the 1960s, the 1970s came on, and actually some amount of evidence started to come on that we could actually modify organisms at the genetic level. And we started to see then thereafter the first model organisms that had extended lifespans. And we continue to do that. And we've gotten better at looking at the natural world and identifying what's happening with certain organisms that live very long outside of humans. And so that gives us the ability to be a lot more confident. Plus, you're going to see there's going to be a lot of human data coming out over the next few years. They're going to show certain areas of age reversal in certain persons. Sorry, I was running to an appointment. And that's going to, Greg Fay, for instance, with his thymus regeneration, he showed some age reversal. You're going to continue to see that in human work, human studies, and in the biohacker community. So I think that this is the time that we're going to get a platform to take off. I think that we do have the technology that can extend human lifespan to the point of getting that takeoff velocity that Aubrey talks about. But we have to get out there and we've got to get into humans, and we actually have to use it. I don't think that we can afford another mouse study. They're not good predictive models of humans, and we now need that human evidence. So my hat goes off to all of you out there who are getting that and collecting good data. Thanks.
Yeah, I'd like to agree with Liz about the relevance and the critical relevance of human data. But we must also go back and ask ourselves what we are able to see from laboratory data. And I think a large part of the problem that is encapsulated in the question, a large part of what does make things different now is still ongoing. Namely, we have more and more areas where we can point to dramatic progress, but then other areas where we can't. So to put extreme examples, we can take nematode worms and make them live 10 times longer than they normally do just with a single genetic intervention. But if we look at mice, the amount that we can extend their lifespan, whether mean or maximum, is pretty much the same as it was in the 1930s when Clive Mackay discovered the benefits of calorie restriction, which is not a cause for optimism. We have to, I think, accept that we still have a way to go in providing a really coherent body of data and a message to humanity to really justify the claim that we are on the brink of dramatic breakthroughs. And maybe we'll never get there. I think one way of saying what Liz just said is that maybe the utility of animal models is just not sufficient, and we will actually just get there by getting there with humans in terms of convincing humanity that this is possible.
I would just add that in addition to the genetic manipulations, there has been a lot of progress in animal models in pharmacological level. So I am fairly optimistic about developing longevity drugs, and I'm sure you're aware of a lot of folks that are working in this area and several companies as well. Now, that's still far away from reversing aging. But at least we can show that in animal models, we can delay aging with pharmacological interventions. And I think that can serve as an impetus to say we need more studies in this topic to have even more impactful therapies.
Since the topic of human models has been brought up, Methuselah Foundation's portfolio companies Organovo and Viscient Bio already use human tissue constructs in searching for and validating small molecule drug interventions. And so it isn't something that's coming, it's something that is here. So, as it's been said, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And so that is something that our foundation, Methuselah Foundation, is going to be working with NASA on as a next step in our Tissue Challenges series.
Actually, David, I agree with you on that. The exciting thing about the the future is that a lot of it is here. So I'm sitting here with a biosensor just stuck on my chest that's reading my vitals 1,000 times a second. I've got this ring on. I've got a watch. I have blood tests. I can do mouth swabs. It's just the beginning of being able to monitor ourselves, to know sometimes years in advance whether we're going to get sick or not. I don't think in the future people will die from heart attacks very often because of these devices. But what's exciting about this world that we're very rapidly moving into, and this device, by the way, that I'm wearing, there are many companies working on this, and doctors use them to send patients home early from hospital, so that's a huge saving. But what we'll see is you can stick these devices on 1 million people and take 1 million swabs or blood samples and process those, and combine that with their medical records and either supplements or drugs that they're taking, either in small cohorts or just because that's what they want to do. We are going to learn so much over the next decade. And I know we don't have a decade, but when you have 1 million people and a lot of them are going to be old and frail, we're going to learn so much just by these massive experiments that are becoming within grasp in terms of the cost to be able to carry them out.
So, if I could add something, Laura, I think the way you framed the question, right, was how we're going to get enough of the population to reach 100 or 120, somewhere between there. And for that, I think a lot of what the panelists are talking about, there's good reason to be optimistic. But I think we use the term age reversal a little too loosely, again, referring to performance measures or markers that have not really been validated in the sense of age reversal, where if you reverse age 20 years, you live 20 years longer. I think, again, those are more related to just the certain states of performance or states of physiology or cells, but not necessarily the core of aging. As Aubrey pointed out earlier, a lot of these markers, although excellent for measuring the biological age, are not necessarily validated or haven't been validated yet for rejuvenation. But I think we can do better than 100 or 120 years. I think we can beat aging. The things that David G. has been alluding to with human tissue constructs, there's a lot of interest, a lot of progress being made there. And yes, they're great for testing drugs, but they're even better for replacing the old body parts that, in the elderly with the young ones. That will reverse all aspects of aging biologically, all the forms of damage which are known to cause all these other hallmarks of aging. So I'm hoping more in that direction will lead to more optimism in terms of just breaking the cap off of the 100, 120 year maximum that we're talking about.
I think I want to just agree that the meaning of the epigenetic clocks needs to be revalidated. So the clocks have been developed to sort of correlate with data that already exists, but if reversing the clock actually reverses aging or aspects of aging, we need to be able to show that by measuring aging in some other way. So one of the things that we're doing is to see if we can link grim age changes to changes in coronary artery calcification or cardiopulmonary exercise testing capacity, because these things predict your longevity over time and in the fairly near future too. If your exercise capacity is much greater, and if we can actually increase that and show that grim age is reduced, exercise capacity is increased, that would be pretty strong evidence that these therapies are actually working in the way that we hope that they are to actually reverse aspects of aging. There's actually evidence in population studies that metformin use can reverse coronary artery calcification, which is a leading cause of heart disease and death. And that's part of our cocktail. So we have some hopes that we'll be able to show these functional or, let's say, risk factor improvements that should be able to independently predict the risk of death and hopefully agree with the predictions made by these clocks. But it's still early days.
Thank you for that, everyone. And I wanted to say that my question was centered around the idea of I am very interested in getting people wanting to seek longevity or to have it as a lifestyle. So the reason I asked this question was because if we promise people 120 years or more of life right now, are we promising them something realistic? versus if we say you're going to live longer with health span within your current lifespan, they might be more inclined to join on a longevity lifestyle. And that was the direction more that I was thinking, but I loved all your answers. David?
Yeah, so to reply to you direct, January 15th, I decided that it was time for me at the age of 67 to eat my own dog food. Under doctor's care, I started taking episodic rapamycin, metformin, fisetin, melatonin. I've lost 35 pounds. I had the gait speed of a 90-year-old. I now am below the measurement point where people would be bothering to test my gait speed. I can do a pike and an L sit without worrying about it. The speed of my thinking has improved. Basically, when people see me, especially after the pandemic, they say, "Wow, what's happened to you?" That's what's needed, Laura. Mere civilians looking at you and said, "Oh my darling, you look so wonderful. What have you done?" And then we get to tell them.
Longevity. Definitely, David. I fully agree with you. David, Sinclair, you wanted to say something?
My first thought was, well done, David. That's fantastic that you've done that, and you're a real role model for everyone. I was curious whether you've met yourself before and after with some of these biological age clocks.
I did not do any of the clocks. What I did do was all of the standard plus extended blood tests, all of the performance tests, whole brain MRI and joint MRI and CT scan thorax. So I have a lot of data that will be before and after, but none of the clocks. The reason I didn't do the clocks is because of the error bar. At the time that I was looking at them, the error bars were plus or minus 5 to 7 years. And so I did not feel that it was strong enough to spend the money because it's expensive.
The best testament is how you actually look. And I know that in longevity discussions on Clubhouse, we've said that if people can't see the difference or feel it, it will be the biggest proof that this leading a longevity lifestyle or taking some of these therapies do work. With that said, we are almost at the top of the hour, and I wanted to quickly reset the room. Also, open the room for questions and let everybody else know that we will be bringing them up. We do hope that you have a bio and for you to be able to come up on stage. So we'll be doing that momentarily. But again, we wanted to welcome everybody to this panel with the scientists reversing aging. And without having to go into further introductions, I will let Avi go to the next question while we open up the stage for the Q&A.
Thank you, Laura, again. And thank you, everyone, for answering the question. If anybody feels that they haven't been able to answer something or something came up, as in they thought about something just now, feel free to answer while you're answering the next question. So the next question is a little bit interesting. This comes up all the time. I know many people here, like Aubrey, David Sinclair, you have written books and put out the way you guys think and what you guys are thinking about the world of tomorrow. But many people ask about, they try to get to this question. So the question is, what are the 2 or 3 things? It doesn't have to be 2 or 3 things. If it's just one, what are the 2 or 3 things that you intrinsically believe that it is inevitable in the future of longevity, aging, health within the next decade? So it's a short time frame, I realize. But what is it that you pretty much base all your experiments, your companies that you're building, all of these things that you're thinking about in your research? And so what are those things? And what are the obstacles, do you think, that can impede that progress? And this is only over the next decade. Please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, let me jump in first because I'm afraid I have to jump off the call in a few minutes at the top of the hour. So actually, the thing that I think is most inevitable over the next 10 years, since that time frame you asked about, is a change of public attitudes with regard to what's going to happen in the subsequent 10 or 20 years. At the moment, almost everybody in the world still believes that they're probably going to live only a few years longer than their parents did. And indeed, that they're going to stay healthy for only a few years longer than their parents did. And I'm convinced that there will be a tipping point where the results, and indeed the public statements of people like myself and David, are going to change that. And when they do, those changes are going to happen very suddenly. I believe there's going to be a really sharp tipping point when people like Oprah Winfrey get on board with this, that is going to going to herald a very turbulent few years while we figure out what to do with the general belief on most people's parts that they're going to live healthily for a lot longer than their parents did. This is something that I don't think anybody's really ready for, in whether it's in governments or in the financial services sector or wherever. And I think that it's very likely to happen within the next 10 years. I would say it's quite likely to happen within the next 5 years.
Yeah, Aubrey, well said. I can feel it already in society. I think this clubhouse meeting here is evidence of that. We're living through this really historical moment where I don't know if you've followed Aubrey and me for that long, but even just 10 years ago and certainly 20 years ago, we were really on the fringe and people thought we were crazy. And it was actually, frankly, close to career ending to talk about age reversal. I think it was about 7 years ago I first started using that term, and it was outrageous at a talk at Stanford. So now it's not mainstream yet, but it's about to break through, and it's an exciting time. I just want to add, what else will I see in 10 years? I think it'll be common to be monitored by your doctor. It'll be common to take senolytic cocktails. It'll be common to treat diseases with therapies that reverse aging. Whether it's the eye or the whole body, I don't know, but I'm certain there will be ways to reverse age, not just by a few years. And Greg, your work is amazing and awesome. Thank you for that. But by a decade or two. And we've seen, at least in animals now, that the epigenetic age reset and the restoration of vision, it goes on for a long time. This may be, quote unquote, a permanent reset until you age out again, and then you can keep resetting the body. And we don't know how many times you can reset the body yet. We know it works once, but I would bet that it works 10 or 100 times. And then we're really talking about a change in the way we can view our lifespan.
By the way, we're very interested in that same question with respect to the thymus, David. If we regenerate the thymus, can we then regenerate it again and again? So that's something we look forward to finding out.
Oh, so I guess I'll chime in here. I agree with that. I think that a lot of what you're going to see is attitudes changing, and I think that's fantastic, and that's absolutely necessary. You're going to see the slow drive of data that's going to start to come through scientific papers showing extended lifespans in model organisms and then soon in humans. You're going to hear more people talk about it, but of course, an obstacle is always how difficult it is for small companies to get into clinical trials. So right now, I'm doing my thesis for my MBA, and it's vastly on a new route of regulation, not through the FDA, going around the FDA, but through the same departments of human and health services in order to get people who are terminally ill access to better drugs. And so the right to try doesn't give access to the drugs that we're talking about today. I call them best choice medicine. And that's drugs that perform better in early basic research than anything we have available on the market. And those drugs exist, and that's what everyone on this call is talking about. But these are still vastly experimental, but without human data, we can't really get to them. So hopefully we'll get the regulators to look at new routes that indemnify themselves from the difficult choices that they have to make in making decisions about new drugs. People will see that. They will see new options open for patients to take part in. They'll see more data coming out. And what can block us is, of course, the enormous amount of money that it costs otherwise to get to even the regulatory service, millions and millions of dollars worth of animal data that, again, is not a very good predictor. And then the $2.6 billion estimate from Tufts University to actually get a drug approved. Let's remove those roadblocks.
Anybody else want to chime in about intrinsically knowing what the next decade looks like?
I can tell you what our provisional roadmap is, if you'd like.
Yeah, please. They'll definitely be based on your system, on your things that you kind of believe.
Right. Our vision is to make 90 the new 50 by 2030. We deliberately chose a falsifiable goal, 2030. That's 8.5 years from now. So we have to figure out where the holes are that would prevent that from happening. And so in no particular order, we need to be able to deliver biological payloads to select body compartments far better than is available today. So delivery as a whole, we need reliable, high-quality bulk cell supplies. Right now, there's not nearly enough high-quality cells available to purchase. One of the biggest rate limiters for the competitors in the vascular tissue challenge competition was they just couldn't get the cells in order to do their organoid constructs. So we need high reliable bulk cell supplies. Distribution. Who's going to deliver these interventions? It's going to be licensed practitioners. Do any of them know anything about what we're doing in significant numbers? My experience is that physicians pretty much stop reading papers the day they get out of the university because they have no time. They're spending all their time dealing with insurance companies and such. And of course, I'm speaking hyperbolically. I know there are exceptions and they're wonderful. So also, trusted validation. Do you know that the pill that you're taking actually has any of the crud you're actually trying to get inside of you? I have no idea if the stuff I'm taking is actually the stuff I think I'm taking. That's missing. Let's see. The regulators need to accept patient trials in a dish because models that are based on animal models are awful. They're not just not very good, they're awful. And they're awful in ways that people don't even think of anymore. If you were to say, is it okay to just take these animals and torture them and ruin them and break them apart and stick things in them? No, it's not okay. It's just what we have to do today. We have to get away from that. It's a moral imperative. Aside from patient trials, and just much better, vastly better in terms of speed and accuracy of coming up with interventions. Engineered functional organs, so we need to go to a next level for the vascular tissue challenge to scale it up to actual clinically relevant constructs like liver patches and so forth. Optimized nutrition biofeedback. Okay, you're eating this leaf. Is it really good? Sure, it says organic, but is there anything in it that I need? And by the way, what do I need? And that's based on our Deep Space Food Challenge with NASA. You should perhaps look that up. Deep Space Food Challenge is a wonderful challenge being put on by NASA and Methuselah. Individuals need to own their own biodata so that they can get prescriptions and diagnosis. This might go on to the blockchain. And then, let's see, one more thing. There's always one more thing. I think I've taken up too much time. Sorry.
I might add very briefly, because I'm sure we want to get to questions, that, and hopefully this is a safe prediction, that the enthusiasm for longevity research and the funding that goes along with that continues to increase in the next 10 years. That's all I wanted to add.
2 quick points. I certainly think that in terms of longevity, as John was saying, yes, I think it's going to increase. People are not going to get younger. We still have an aging population, so there will continue to be interest in developing interventions. So I certainly see the development of longevity pharmacology and longevity drugs as becoming a reality in the next 10 years. I'm a little less optimistic about rejuvenation technologies or reversing aging. First, because we don't really know how to do it even in animal models. We can manipulate aging, we can delay aging in animal models, including in mice, but we don't know how to reverse aging. So I think there's still a lot we have to figure out in that context. I think there's some promising approaches. David C. Clare were talking about the Yamanaka factors, or 3 of the Yamanaka factors that they've used, but it's still not very clear how you then turn that into a human therapy, for instance. So I would say the next 10 years, yes, I see a continued growth in longevity industry, longevity biotech, research on aging, development of longevity drugs, but not necessarily unless there's a big, massive discovery, not necessarily on reversing aging or rejuvenation technologies.
Thank you, Pedro. I want to give a chance to Alexandra and Greg to perhaps also answer this before we go into the Q&A. We're very happy to have so many people interested in asking questions and wanting to chime in the conversation. We just wanted to move this along. As you saw, a couple of our speakers had to leave, so I want to make sure that we get to answer as many questions as possible, as other of our speakers probably have to leave as well. But Alexandra, Greg, want to chime in?
I'll let Alexandra go first.
Okay, if you want to. I would hope that people would take more interest in their own health and would become more empowered, and all these kind of like positive signs that are coming from the trials that are currently running would kind of inspire them to really become invested in their own health and try out more and pay more attention to their health. So I would hope that this is a trend that carries on and becomes bigger.
And I just think that the example that we're trying to set, which is to show that aging intervention can be done now, begins to catch on as a concept. And as the evidence accumulates, I think it'll become more and more obvious something significant is actually happening. Sergey Young has recently bought into the idea of using repurposed drugs to advance the cause of aging intervention. I think it's a really good idea because the barriers to getting these things through FDA approval process are quite light. For example, with our therapy, we were able to show statistically significant improvements in kidney function in 9 guys in a 1-year period of time. So if that could be made into a yardstick for FDA approval, we should have a ridiculously easy time compared to people who are attempting to develop entirely new drug entities. And by the way, there are ways that we can improve human growth hormone to make that into a separately approvable drug that we can essentially own ourselves as well, so that even though it's a repurposed drug, it's effectively a new drug. So this kind of paradigm, if this leads to early signs that you can actually do something meaningful on a clinical basis about aging, not in 10 years or 20 years, but maybe in 1 or 2 or 3 years, then I do think the attitudes will begin to change in an optimistic direction. I'm already seeing lots of signs of this. I'm seeing increasing enthusiasm over the possibility. So I do think that there is a sea change coming, and it's going to be boosted by many different advances that are all coming into aging from different directions. But I think that we're beginning to see signs of this happening already.
Thanks, Greg. We're going to go now to our Q&A part of this discussion.